He just sort of said, oh, that's business. And that's it. And I say, yeah, sure, it's business. It's also friendship. It's also morals.
The story of popular music has had great collaborations, and one of them broke the radio stations of the 80s thanks to Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney. An established star with a great past joined forces with the greatest promise of pop. From their collaboration came 3 songs: Say, 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 The Girl Is Mine, and The Man. And besides the hits of this friendship, McCartney's advice to Jackson to get into the business of buying music rights was born. What Paul never expected was that Michael would end up buying the Beatles catalog, and thus, one of the most successful collaborations of the 80s ended in a battle that involved money, betrayals, and grudges that were never settled. This is the story. In the early 60s, music publishers were in charge of collecting royalties for radio and TV broadcasts, covers of their songs, and sheet music sales, which was a big business in those days. The Beatles had released their single Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, and their manager, Brian Epstein, felt that the publisher had failed to give a great return on the single. So, on George Martin's recommendation, he contacted Dick James to negotiate a new contract for the band's future songs. James came up with the idea of setting up a separate company to handle only Lennon and McCartney's songs, Northern Songs, where they would split the revenue like this: 50% to Dick James and his partner, 20% to John, 20% to Paul, and 10% for Brian Epstein. And although today this arrangement is unthinkable, in 1963, it seemed to be a great bet.
John and I didn't know about song publishing. We literally thought that songs were in the air and that everyone owned them. That's literally how we met our first publisher. Hi there. He said, come in, sit down. Is that what you think? Sit over here. And that was the deal they did.
Well, pretty soon you had to get to know they could be owned because someone else knew they weren't in the sky. And he owned them. So that's what happened to us on the Northern Songs thing, which was me and John. Very early on, we got managed very well into a little situation. So it meant that the lion's share of whatever songs we did were taken by someone else.
In 1965, in order to reduce the income tax burden, it was decided to convert Northern Songs into a public company. 1,250,000 shares were traded on the London Stock Exchange, which changed the percentages and included George and Ringo with a percentage in minimum shareholding. At the same time, Lennon and McCartney renewed their previous 3-year publishing contracts, tying them to Northern Songs until 1973. By the summer of 1966, 88 Lennon and McCartney songs had been recorded and released, and there were 2,900 covers by different artists. It was a round business.
When we went to Rishikesh with the Maharishi, the man who owned them sold them while we were out of town. Dick James, his name was. And we got back to town, we said, Dick, you can't do that. He said, you want to bet? And he was quite right. He had 51% of the company.
Dick James and his partner sold their percentage to ATV, and the Beatles' lawyers spent much of the late 1960s trying to regain control of the company, either by buying back shares to increase their percentage or by trying to buy ATV. But the problems of the band's breakup and a move by Paul to buy shares in his name on the sly hindered negotiations and fractured the deal with the band. With the Beatles separated and each pursuing solo careers, there was much less interest during the 1970s in recovering the songs.
Take 3 and the only take. 1.
Paul and Michael met at a party in 1975, where McCartney played him on the piano the song Girlfriend, a composition of Paul's that, in his words, because of the falsetto of the song, could fit very well with Jackson. He had composed it thinking of him. Jackson was a big Beatles fan and had great respect and admiration for Paul, and he ended up recording the song for his Off the Wall album, while Paul McCartney would end up recording the song also for his London Town album. The result of this meeting and collaboration would start everything that would come later. It was Christmas of 1980 when a call came into McCartney's house. It was Michael Jackson inviting him to collaborate.
And I said, who's this? You know, kind of guarding my privacy, private number. I said, who's this? Michael originally rang me, said, do you want to make some hits? And I said, yeah, sure I do, you know.
They began working together in London in the fall of 1981. The McCartneys put him up at their Sussex home and booked George Martin's Air Studios to begin composing, Say 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 being the first. During their stay, Paul talked to him about how to grow the music business by buying licenses, and told him how many he would have bought during the 70s, including the entire catalogs of Carl Perkins or Fats Waller. That's the way to make a lot of money. Paul told him,
Business, you ought to think about music publishing. It's because it's very good business. You love music. I'm into it. It does very well. It's a nice, easy business for a musician to be in. And it's a very rewarding business because it's music, it's songs, beautiful songs. So he kind of said, okay, and that was the end of it. And then a couple of weeks later we were chatting and he just came up to me and said, I'm going to buy your songs, And I went, yeah, great, good one, and we just carried on. And then a few weeks after that he said, I'm going to buy your songs. I thought, well, it's a bit of an old joke by now, but very funny, all right, And I still thought he was kidding, And just a few weeks later, just somebody rang me up and said, Michael Jackson's bought Northern Songs.
In April 1982, he met again with Michael in Los Angeles to complete Say 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 and record The Man and the Girl Is Mine. Between 1981 and 1982, Paul had tried with Yoko to get his songs back, but without success.
And what happened was, at a certain point, these songs changed hands from the original publisher to another guy, and then to another guy. And at one of these junctures, I was offered the songs. Then there was a chance where I could have bought it. I felt very embarrassed buying them myself because they're Lennon-McCartneys. I wouldn't have liked to just own them myself. I felt bad about that. So I rang Yoko and I said, look, we got a chance to buy these songs. The man's asking 20 million, 10 to you, 10 to me. Should we do it? And she actually said, I think we can get it for 5. In fact, they didn't go for 20, they went for 50. Straight off the back of Thriller, he was like, cash rich, baby.
In 1983, Paul tried again to buy the songs now on his own, but it is believed that Paul's insistence on only buying the Beatles songs and not the entire catalog, coupled with Yoko's interference on her own, may have spoiled the negotiations. In 1985, Paul was surprised by the news that Michael Jackson had bought ATV. Thriller had made him a millionaire. It became the best-selling album of all time, and the purchase of the Beatles catalog could not have come at a better time for Jackson. Michael claims that he personally warned Paul about his intentions to buy the company. $47.5 million was the final sum. Paul felt it was a betrayal, although it is known that Jackson acted decently and legitimately during the negotiations. Paul had the resources to buy the songs, he just decided not to, or he didn't want to pay what was being asked. Paul consistently made his opinion of the case public. I think it's dodgy to do something like that. He concluded that it was like to be someone's friend and then buy the rug they're standing on. Typical of Jackson, he remained quiet on the matter. However, he did let out a Freudian slip in his 1989 autobiography, Moonwalk. He claimed, Paul and I both learned the hard way about business, and the importance of publishing and royalties and the dignity of songwriting.
Do something. Anything.
Since the purchase of the catalog, Michael began to capitalize on his investment and licensed Beatles songs for commercials, movies, and even thought of selling them on gift cards and music boxes. But it all fell apart when Paul saw the Beatles song, Revolution, in a Nike commercial.
But I do intend to have a word with him. I spoke to him in LA, actually.
You did?
Yeah, and said, look, we've got to come to a good understanding here, because there are a number of things I don't like about how he runs the company.
In our case, the trouble is, like the Nike thing that came up, I don't know if you heard about that, but the trouble is that we never did do commercials. We had the offers from the big soft drinks companies, you know who I'm talking about, big, huge offers to use a Beatles song, to use this and that, but we always turned them down because we believed it'd devalue the whole thing. But I think we shouldn't do that. I don't really think we should do that. I think it's more sensible to leave the kind of legend intact, and I think they'll do great, the songs. I think they'll continue to do great.
No, but I did talk to him about it, but he kind of blanked me on it. He kept saying, that's just business, Paul, you know.
In 1991, Jackson sold 50% of his stake in ATV to Sony for $100 million. Over the years, Paul continued to speak in some interviews on the subject, and a false rumor arose that Jackson planned to return his share of the Beatles songs to him. But it did not happen, either during his lifetime or after his death. This is completely untrue. I had not thought for 1 minute that the original report about the will was true, and therefore the report that I'm devastated is also totally false. However, at the time of Michael Jackson's death, he only owned 5% of the company. Over the years, this ceased to be an obsession for Paul. The fact of having to pay royalties for singing his songs or asking permission to use them in a film or documentary began to bother him less and less. And somehow, a light opened up for Paul when by law, his songs started coming back to him, as the US Copyright Act of 1976 gave songwriters the ability to recover the publisher's share of the songs after 56 years of their publication. So as of 2019, Paul started to get his 1963 songs back. As of today, 2023, he already has the rights to Beatles songs up to 1967, and in 2026, he'll have the entire Beatles catalog back. This is a small recounting of this great story. Comment here below your impressions, and we invite you to subscribe to our channel and like us. Thanks for watching. This is Music Box.